The headquarters of OmniCore rose like a monument of glass and steel in the heart of Silicon Valley, gleaming under the cold light of a California morning. To the outside world, it was a symbol of human ingenuity, an ivory tower of technology where the brightest minds shaped the future. But inside, that tower was wrapped in a fog of quiet failure. The conference room known as Executive X12 had once echoed with certainty, sharp decisions, confident plans, and applause from board members who believed in endless progress. Now only silence lingered. The pale glow of a massive LED screen painted every face in a sterile blue, revealing fatigue, frustration, and a creeping sense of disbelief. At the head of the table sat Dr. Adrian Cole, Chief Technology Officer of OmniCore, a man whose calm once inspired whole teams to follow him without question. Now his stillness carried the weight of exhaustion. For months, OmniCore's crown jewel, Project Luma, the next generation of optical AI processors, had been collapsing under a microscopic flaw. The system had been simulated hundreds of times. The hardware had been replaced. Yet the problem remained. A tiny structural weakness appearing after long hours of operation, a deviation so small that no sensor could detect it before it spread. The engineers had data, endless data. They had quantum diagnostics, precision modeling, and predictive analytics that mapped the subatomic world. But they no longer had answers. Dr. Cole looked at his lead engineer, Ethan Ward, a man whose resume could fill a portfolio thicker than the device manuals they designed. Ethan's mind worked like a machine, precise, elegant, and fast. But even machines can falter when facing the chaos of the real world. For the first time in his career, Ethan felt small before the very technology he'd helped create. They had checked everything: the welding temperature of nanojoints, the purity of the inert gas, the micro-vibrations from the HVAC systems. Every variable was accounted for, modeled, analyzed. And yet the flaw persisted, mocking their brilliance. The project was bleeding millions by the day, threatening a government contract that could define the company's future. Dr. Cole gave the team 48 hours to find the cause. If not, the production line would halt, and their dream would collapse with it. The meeting ended in a silence heavy enough to crush hope. As night descended, Ethan stayed behind. He wandered through the labyrinth of steel and glass, down to the production floor. Giant robotic arms moved with lifeless precision, welding components that shimmered under the fluorescent light. Every motion was exact, yet something about it felt empty. Perfection had never looked so hollow. Among the polished machines and silent corridors, Ethan noticed a small figure moving slowly across the floor. It was Mr. Hanley, one of the janitors. For 10 years, he had worked the night shift, cleaning the same hallways the engineers rushed through without a glance. His cart creaked softly, the only sound not suppressed by OmniCore's noise-canceling system. He was an unremarkable man to most, a stooped back, graying hair, and eyes dulled by time. Yet behind those eyes flickered something sharper than fatigue: observation. As Ethan passed by, absorbed in his thoughts, the faint hiss of compressed gas caught his ear. It came from one of the argon welding nozzles. It wasn't new. He'd heard it countless times before. But something about it felt different tonight. A rhythm slightly offbeat, a whisper of imperfection. He paused, then dismissed it. The sensors would have flagged it if it mattered. He turned to leave, but, for reasons he couldn't explain, stopped again. Somewhere deep inside, intuition stirred. Something primal, something human, beyond code and calculation. He remembered the janitor's slow, methodical movements, the way the man paused to listen before scrubbing each section of the floor. That night, Ethan didn't go home. He stayed, replaying hours of surveillance footage from the assembly line. He silenced the data overlays, turned off the metrics, and focused only on sound. Frame by frame, he listened to the background noise of the factory, the faint hum of cooling systems, the rhythmic clicking of servo motors, the steady exhale of argon. Then he heard it. A shift, a minuscule change in the pitch of that hiss, barely audible, yet recurring just before each recorded failure. A fluctuation the machines couldn't feel, but a human might. It wasn't a defect in the robot, nor in the materials. It was the environment itself. Something invisible was touching the process. Ethan returned to the floor the next morning. He followed the line of machines, tracing airflow maps and sensor logs until he stood before a massive cooling unit tucked in a corner of the plant. It was designed to regulate temperature for the entire section. An enormous machine, breathing invisible rivers of air. According to the schematics, it was isolated from the production line. But physics often disobeyed paperwork. He realized that the exhaust from the cooling system released faint waves of humid air into the room, rising and dispersing slowly. Under normal conditions, it vanished harmlessly. But when the system operated under peak load, like during intensive simulation hours, the discharge quickened, creating unpredictable microcurrents that brushed past the welding zone. Even a trace of moisture, 1 part per billion, was enough to alter the purity of the argon gas used in the weld. The reaction was brief, invisible, and devastating. The flaw was real, and it had been hiding in plain sight. Ethan's heart pounded. The solution was simple, almost embarrassingly so: redirect the exhaust airflow, or synchronize the cooling cycle to avoid those humid bursts during production. Weeks of chaos unraveled into clarity in seconds. He could almost hear the echo of that quiet janitor's voice, not in words, but in the rhythm of his work, the awareness in his silence. In the next morning's meeting, Dr. Cole listened as Ethan presented the discovery. The explanation was so ordinary, so human, that it stunned the room into disbelief. All their models, their simulations, their algorithms, none had considered the possibility that something as humble as humidity could sabotage perfection. Dr. Cole asked how the idea had emerged, and Ethan hesitated. The truth carried weight. Finally, he told them. The spark had come from a man most of them had never noticed, a janitor who had mentioned, almost casually, that the sound of the argon gas seemed to change sometimes. The room fell still. A few smirked. Others shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to accept that the billion-dollar puzzle had been cracked by someone outside their hierarchy of brilliance. Dr. Cole's expression darkened, torn between disbelief and the dawning recognition of something deeper. He asked for the man to be brought in. Moments later, Mr. Hanley appeared in the doorway, hands still gloved, his cart parked quietly behind him. The room of scientists and executives stared as if an apparition had entered, a ghost of the ordinary, walking among gods of intellect. Dr. Cole looked at him and asked, almost out of formality, who he really was. The janitor's eyes met his, steady and unflinching. And then, in the kind of calm that silences even arrogance, the truth came forth. Years ago, Hanley had been a senior manufacturing engineer at Zenith Dynamics, one of OmniCore's fiercest rivals. He had designed production lines for early semiconductor chips before automation replaced intuition. But when his company fell apart after a similar microscopic failure, he was blamed, labeled outdated, and cast aside. He never stopped working with machines, even when stripped of his title. He joined OmniCore to survive, but never stopped listening. Machines spoke to him not in data, but in tone, rhythm, and breath. He heard what the algorithms ignored. The revelation swept through the room like a quiet storm. Pride dissolved into shame. They had been too smart to see what wisdom already knew. Dr. Cole felt something crack inside his own certainty. He realized that the very culture he'd built, the one that worshipped complexity, had blinded them to simplicity. They had turned knowledge into a cage. He ordered Ethan to implement Hanley's solution immediately, install a humidity filter at the cooling exhaust, recalibrate the airflow, and reschedule production cycles. By the following week, the defect rate fell to 0. OmniCore had been saved not by innovation, but by humility. In the days that followed, Dr. Cole couldn't shake the image of the old man pushing his cart through the silent halls. The sound of those squeaking wheels echoed differently now, like a metronome marking the heartbeat of the factory. When the time came to review the team's success, Dr. Cole made a decision that startled everyone. He asked for Mr. Hanley to be reinstated, not as a janitor, but as chief manufacturing engineer for the Luma project. Ethan hesitated at first, unsure how the man would react. When he found Hanley later that evening, the old man was in the generator room, wiping a film of dust from a neglected control panel. He looked up only when Ethan approached, his eyes carrying that same calm as before. Ethan handed him the contract. The title gleamed on the paper like a mirror of redemption. Hanley read it quietly, then smiled. Not the smile of triumph, but of someone who had seen this story before. He asked if he'd need to relearn the modern tools, the latest software. Ethan promised he would have help. Hanley nodded, his eyes glancing toward the machinery nearby. He mentioned softly that the generator's fuel pump sounded rougher than usual. If it failed, the production line would stop again. Ethan paused, realizing that wisdom never shouted. It whispered softly enough for only the attentive to hear. That night, as the lights dimmed across the facility, the rhythm of work continued, a symphony of steel and electricity guided by both science and silence. Dr. Cole stood by the window of his office, watching the reflection of the city ripple on the glass. He understood now that knowledge alone was not mastery. Mastery came from awareness, the ability to notice the smallest imperfection in a world obsessed with precision. He thought of how easily arrogance had crept into their brilliance, how the company had nearly lost everything because no one had thought to listen to the hum of the machines or the hiss of the gas. The tower of glass that once symbolized control now reminded him of fragility. Human fragility. And in that fragility lay truth. He would later say, in an address to the entire company, that technology could predict almost everything, except humility. He reminded them that intellect without empathy leads only to noise, while wisdom, no matter where it comes from, creates harmony. From that day on, every engineer at OmniCore was required to spend a week on the production floor, not to learn coding or systems, but to listen, to the machines, to the workers, to the rhythm of creation itself. The company changed. So did the people. In the quiet spaces between the hum of innovation and the whisper of human hands, they rediscovered something sacred, the balance between perfection and presence. Somewhere in the vast, glowing maze of OmniCore, Mr. Hanley continued his nightly rounds. The creak of his cart still echoed softly through the polished corridors, though now it was no longer the sound of invisibility. It was the heartbeat of remembrance, because sometimes the smallest sound in the quietest corner carries the weight of an entire world.